Hi everyone. So I'm doing a little brief video here on metacognition and self-regulation. It's a bit of a recap and a bit of a refresher on kind of what the key principles are around that connected to distance learning. I think this is really important because metacognition and self-regulation we know is a really important tool in general teaching. The EF toolkit has shown us that, and the guidance report produced alongside it. But I think that's particularly important during periods of distance learning when we're teaching remotely. And actually the EF rapid assessment put it as one of the 4 or 5 key things that teachers should be focusing on in order for this to go well. So for that reason, I think it's timely to do a bit of a recap and a refresher. So there's not necessarily new stuff in here, but I'm just trying to draw it into one place and make it a bit more succinct for you. Okay, so just quickly then, in terms of what we mean by metacognition and self-regulation, so the EF defines self-regulated learning as having 3 bits really. So you've got cognition, your toolbox of strategies, you've got your metacognition, how you think about those, and then you've got your motivation, whether you can be bothered to do it. Okay, and those 3 things together make self-regulated learning. Then if you zoom in on metacognition, as this graphic does, within that you've got metacognitive knowledge, which is the knowledge of the task. Like say we're talking about an English essay, knowing what an English essay looks like and all the things that it should have within it. The knowledge of strategies, so like the rule of 3 when doing persuasive writing within a essay, and the knowledge of self, you and that task. How do you react to that task? How do you feel when you do it? Is it something you find it easy to motivate yourself with? That kind of stuff. And then alongside that, you have metacognitive regulation, which is your ability to plan, monitor and evaluate your learning in each individual sphere. And so, your knowledge of the task will feed into planning, your knowledge of strategies will feed into planning, your knowledge of yourself will feed into planning, and then the same with monitoring and evaluating. Okay, so metacognition is basically like a 9-part model according to the EF. That's the kind of normal way of looking at it for us here at Durrington. There are other ways of thinking about metacognition and self-regulation. I'm just going to share one of those with you. This is from James Mannion and was published recently in Impact Journal. And here he says that metacognition is how we control and monitor our thoughts. Self-regulation is best thought of as how we monitor and control our emotions and our behaviour. And actually self-regulated learning is the combination of those 2 things. So while the EF kind of split out motivation as being separate from cognition and cognition and metacognition, this model kind of pushes them together and says like how they relate is really what allows you to be metacognitive or not. Either way, we're thinking about the same thing, which is how students can monitor and purposefully direct their own learning. Yeah. So how much ownership do they take for it? How much thought do they give it? Or are teachers just trying to cause learning without the help of the students, which is often kind of where we find ourselves at times. And that's particularly pertinent during a lockdown, that we're helping students to become metacognitive, to become self-regulating, and we know it can be taught. So let's do that as well as we can. So an example and a non-example, something I've shared with you before. So this is the example given here is of students doing a retrieval practice quiz, something they do a lot. So student A is being a self-regulating learner. Student A is not being a self-regulating learner. Student B is being a self-regulating learner. So if you just scan through student A's characteristics there. Okay, not a bad student we all probably recognise, but not self-regulating. If you look then, scan through student B. Okay, so that student, when you look at the profile of that student, they're thinking deeply about every aspect of the task. What happens before, what happens during, what happens after. And that's what we want our students to be able to do. That's what's going to make them self-regulating learners. So we want more of our students to be student B, essentially. That's the kind of, I guess, journey we're on in general. And that's what we want particularly to be helping our students with during this lockdown period. So practical ways we can do that. Split into planning, monitoring and evaluating. Things we can do as teachers. So 6 things for planning. Number 1, at the start of the lesson, remind them of all the resources they're going to need. So what is the stuff, whether it's electronic or tangible, what's the stuff they're going to need? Make sure that they've got that ready. Number 2, remind them that when they're watching a Loom video, they can pause, rewind it to check understanding. And in fact, people are building this into their Loom videos now, and they're actually sort of explicitly saying, stop here, go back and check that, rather than it just being a series of instructions and then leaving them to regulate it themselves. That's been built in, and that's excellent. Number 3, so explicitly explaining the planning strategies prior to the completion of the task through a kind of modelling of it. So you give them a question, whatever it is, a task, and you put a small model on there going, okay, so what I'm thinking about when I'm looking at this question is, and I'm always trying to discover this part of the question, and that really helps me work out what to do. So putting all of that into our instructions is key. Number 4, make sure we can question the students on their procedural knowledge as well as their sort of declarative knowledge, and not just asking them, what facts do you know about this, but how do we actually go about completing these tasks? What do you need to do in a task like this? Quiz them on that sort of knowledge as well. And also alongside that, number 5, get them to think about, when this went well in the past, what successful strategies did you use? When we're encountering this sort of thing, what do we do? What are our toolbox here? What's in it? Let's explain them. Let's look at them. And then lastly, think about, trying to help students think about, when you look at a big piece of work that you've got in front of you, what are your starting points? What are you going to do first, and why are you doing that instead of something else? Right, in terms of monitoring, 7 ideas here. Number 1, quite simply, don't try and cover too much. If we try and cover too much, it's going to be really hard for students to monitor how well it's going. Break it down into small chunks, then they can monitor that stuff more easily. Number 2, put in lots of checkpoints during the distance lessons. Ask them to reflect. How's it going? Is this easy? Is this hard? Why do you think that is? Give them, number 3, ways of judging that. How can I decide whether that's going well or whether that's going badly? Now, you'll notice I'm being very generic here, and that's because, this is going to be different in every subject. Number 4, encourage them that it's okay to stop and start again if it hasn't gone well. For example, I've done this video 3 times now, not through actually a metacognitive approach, just because the technology hasn't worked, but I'm sure the 3rd version is better than the other 2. Number 5, give them strategies of what to do when you get stuck, so that they can recognise, I'm getting stuck, and that again can be modelled. So model yourself getting stuck doing something, and then model yourself unsticking how you do it. Often we only model a perfect version. It's not always useful to the students. Number 6, procedural checklists. So within this lesson, you're going to need to be able to do these 4 things really well. Okay, just rate yourself at how good you are at them, and that will help you with the lesson. And number 7, model how they can monitor their work. So show yourself monitoring. So show yourself doing some work and then thinking, oh, I've got a bit stuck there, or that was good. And the reason I know that is good is because, or even better, if you can show how a student has monitored their own learning, maybe showing where they've crossed stuff out and tried it again. And lastly, evaluating. Always ask them to reflect. Build in structured reflection into your remote teaching. Ask students to share their strategies. What did you try today? Did it work? Why not? And prompt students to ask themselves questions about where they got stuck and why they got stuck. Okay, so if we can do those things as teachers, we can add that layer. We're going to help our students be more self-regulating and more metacognitive. If you want to know more, when I send this PowerPoint out, you can click these links and it will take you to these things. So there's 3 videos there, a bit more detailed than this one. One is a more detailed version of self-regulation as a concept. One is about how we can support pupils to be self-regulating. One is about how we can support teachers, which is the stuff that I've just gone through. And then we've got subject-specific videos of different teachers showing how to model, metacognitive strategies within their subjects. Those are all brilliant and were done in the last lockdown. So have a look at those if you like. Hopefully that's useful, and best of luck with it. Any questions about metacognition, please come and find me and ask.